A warm welcome to our second Summertown talk. Let me kind of give you a flavour of how the evening's going to work. We're going to spend the next 20 minutes or so hearing for an answer to this question about equality. We're going to think together about that as I kind of speak about that issue, and then we're going to have some time to think, ask any questions we've got. We might do that kind of all together. We might do it around tables. We might kind of do more of a Q&A format. We'll work that out in a bit. But for now, we're going to get going. And as we get going, I imagine I can say with a high level of confidence that every single one of us in this room believes in equality. Every single one of us believes in equality. We think it matters. We care about it. We care about equality across race, across religion, across sex, across class, whatever it is, we care about equality. And because we care about equality, we care about the basic principle that comes along with that, which is the principle of human rights. We think it is important that people are treated as those who have rights. Because if every single person is equal, every single person deserves the same treatment. We believe in equality, which I'm sure we all do. We believe in human rights, I'm sure we all do. Every single one of us would say we know that humans matter. But the question we're going to ask this evening is not whether humans matter, we agree on that, is why humans matter. Particularly if we are nothing more than matter. Why do humans matter? What makes us believe that we all have rights and worth? Because ultimately, that question of whether we have rights and worth is a belief. It is not something you can prove. So if you test under laboratory conditions, you cannot prove that human rights exist. In fact, if you take any two people and you kind of investigate them, what you generally find is quite a lot of difference. Take any two people by any one metric and you will normally find difference. There'll be different heights, different strengths, so on and so forth. You will consistently find in people difference. And yet we say that across that difference, equality matters. We believe in equality. So the question is, why? I think we're really helped on that by this guy, a guy called Yuval Noah Harari. He's written this kind of big tome. In a minute, we're going to hear from him. Let me tell you a bit about who he is. He's a historian. He's written this book all about the kind of history of humanity. It's commended by Bill Gates, Barack Obama, the list goes on. It's sold 21 million copies. It was in the Sunday Times bestseller list for 96 consecutive weeks. It's a really successful book. And his basic principle that this book explains when it comes to this question of human rights is explained in this kind of 1 minute from a TED talk he did. We'll listen to him for a minute.
Take the legal field as an example. Today in the world, many, maybe most legal systems are based on this idea, this belief in human rights. But human rights are just like heaven and like God. It's just a fictional story that we've invented and spread around. It may be a very nice story. It may be a very attractive story. We want to believe it. But it's just a story. It's not a reality. It is not a biological reality. Just as jellyfish and woodpeckers and ostriches have no rights, Homo sapiens have no rights also. Take a human, cut him open, look inside, you find their blood, and you find the heart and lungs and kidneys, but you don't find there any rights. The only place you find rights is in the fictional stories that humans have invented and spread around. And the same thing is also true in the political field. States and nations are also, like human rights.
Great. Do you see the point he makes? Human rights don't really exist. If you cut a person open, you never find rights. You find organs. Rights are not something you can prove. Instead, they are a story that humans have told ourselves. In fact, as he talks it through in his book, he basically says this is one of the reasons why we as a species are so successful, is we are able to tell ourselves stories, believe them, because they are useful for us as a society. He says human rights don't really exist. People are not really equal, but we need to believe that for society to function. He says they're just a story, a made-up story like God and heaven. Effectively, what he is saying is human rights are a convenient falsehood. Equality is a convenient falsehood. It's not true, but it's useful to believe. And so the question is, are we happy to live our lives based on a convenient falsehood? Most people, maybe us included, will base much of our lives on equality. We will live based on the importance of equality. Are we happy to live our lives based on something that is a convenient falsehood? Are we happy to live our lives basically saying, we know that equality isn't real, but we're going to believe it anyway? Are you happy to live your life like that? Because that is, as this guy says, that is where you end up if you actually think carefully about human rights. Or at least that is where you end up with no God in the picture. You have basically three options. Option one is to live your life based on a convenient falsehood. Option two is to ditch your belief in equality. Or option three is to find an actual foundation for that belief. And my hope this evening is to show you there is an actual foundation for that thing that you believe and care about. We're going to do that by asking two questions. The first, aren't human rights self-evident? Aren't human rights self-evident? Aren't they just obvious to everyone? I mean, that's what the founders of America thought, isn't it? Here's what they had to say. Famous words. We hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. These truths are self-evident. Everyone's equal, everyone has rights. Except, it's just quite obvious that that's not true. Number one, it's obvious that's not true because they feel the need to say, we hold these truths to be self-evident. If they actually were self-evident, it wouldn't be we hold it, they would just be self-evident. They feel the need to say we hold it because not everyone believed it. Not everyone, there and then, believed these things to be true. And so they are claiming something to be self-evident that a lot of people didn't think was true. It wasn't universally accepted then. It hasn't been universally accepted throughout human history. So just take a step back into the ancient world for a moment. If you go back to the ancient world, the kind of world of Greece and Rome, what would be obvious to the eye, what would be self-evident there, is not equality, but difference. Tom Holland is a kind of historian of that time period. Here's what he has to say. Imagine going to Rome and talking about human rights and equality. He says that every human being possessed an equal dignity was not a remotely self-evident truth in that culture. A Roman would have laughed at it. It was obvious that people weren't equal. There's slave and there's free. There's those with high power in society and those with low power in society. There's those who are physically stronger and those who are physically weaker. And on you can go. It was obvious that people are not equal. That's ancient Rome. The same thought process existed in ancient Greece. Plato is one of the most famous philosophers of all time. People describe Western philosophy as basically footnotes to Plato. Here's what Plato has to say about this question. Nature herself intimates that it is just for the better to have more than the weaker. The more powerful other than the worse. The more powerful than the weaker. Do you see? It's not just that he says that it is better for those who have more or those who are stronger to have more. He says nature herself intimates that. He says if you look at nature, the thing that is self-evident is that the strong beat the weak. The thing that is self-evident from nature is that is right, that is fair, that is just. it wasn't remotely self-evident to much of history that human rights were a thing, that there was equality. So aren't human rights self-evident? Well, no, because an awful lot of people who've thought these things through very deeply throughout history have decided they weren't. And so therefore they cannot be self-evident. They might be true, but they cannot be self-evident. And so then the second question we're going to ask, is there a basis for human rights? We've seen that there isn't a kind of pure biological basis. You don't cut someone open and find human rights. You can't claim it's self-evident because there are lots of people who've thought that they don't exist. And so is there a basis for human rights? You don't find it in the Declaration of Independence. That's not a basis for it. It's just a statement of it. You don't find it in nature. Plato shows us that. But you do find a basis for it in the Bible. Genesis chapter 1 is the first chapter of the Bible. And in the first chapter of the Bible, God says this. We're told this. God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. This is the true basis for equality. At the very beginning, God makes people in his image. Harari says in his book, the Americans got the idea of equality from Christianity. Tom Holland says, the founding thing that sits beneath the Declaration of Independence is the book of Genesis. This is the basis for human rights. Because according to these words, every man, every woman is made in the image of God. Whatever race you are from, you are made in the image of God. However much money you have, you are made in the image of God. There is utter equality. What is the image of God? That might not be language we're used to. For now, let's just leave it as the image of God is likeness to God. So in some way we are like God, and that bestows worth on us. It is that we are in some ways like God, and that bestows worth on us. You see, if we think it is obvious that men and women are equal, if we think it is obvious that people from different races are equal, if we think it is obvious that people from different classes are equal and should be treated with equal dignity, that is because this verse has permeated our society for hundreds, thousands of years. When these words were penned, they would have been shocking to most of the cultures of the time. When these words landed in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, they would have been shocking to those at the time. But they have resounded through history, and so we read it and go, well, obviously everyone is equal. Obviously everyone has value. And the reason we do is because we have come to believe a certain model for how to assign value. There are two basic models for how to assign value. You can have extrinsic value or intrinsic value. I'll explain what those mean. We're going to think about extrinsic value first. That is, your value comes from outside yourself, from stuff that you do or perform, not just by virtue of who you are. So extrinsic value basically says people are worth what they're able to do. People are worth their utility. People are worth their productivity. People are worth their achievement. And therefore, those who can do more are worth more. Pretty simple. But what that means, when you think about it carefully, is it means that your worth can be lost. If you have a car crash and are no longer able to perform the function you used to be able to perform, whatever that function is, if you believe in extrinsic value as a basis for worth, you have lost some or all of your worth. It is to say that worth functions like a dimmer switch. It goes up and down, depending on your ability. It means that those who can do less are worth less. There is, however, another option. Not extrinsic value, but intrinsic value. That is the idea that your value is not tied to your worth, to your ability. That is, that it is not the case that those who can do more, those who can produce more, are worth more. No, instead, your value comes by virtue of the fact that you are a human. There is something inherent in you that brings value. You don't have to produce, you just are. Value in this model is like an on-off switch. Either you have it or you don't. There's no gradation. And it shines bright. Those who have been created in God's image are those who have this kind of value. Those who have been created in God's image are those who have this kind of value. And the Bible says that is all of us. That our value is not tied to what we can do. Our value isn't tied to what we can do. No, instead our value is inherent. We have value because God made us. It's a staggering thought, isn't it? Your value is in no way, shape, or form tied to what you can do. Your value doesn't go up or down depending how useful you are. It doesn't increase when you do well. It doesn't decrease when you do badly. Because if Genesis is right, there is a basis for human rights, and it is in the fact that we are created by God. And that is equally true for everyone, regardless of their background, regardless of their gender. Everyone is equal in this way. Here's how one Christian writer puts it. Human beings do not need to earn the right to be treated as creatures of great value. Our dignity is intrinsic, rooted in the fact that God made us. Think about those first few words for a moment. Human beings do not need to earn the right to be treated as creatures of great value. I wonder how many of us, in various ways, spend our lives trying to earn the right. Earn the right to be treated a certain way, who spend our lives constantly battling to prove ourselves to others so that they will treat us a certain way. If Genesis is right, human beings do not need to earn this right. That means the person who is unable to do anything is equally valued. The person who is severely disabled is equally valued to the academic high flyer. The person who contributes loads to the economy is equally valued to the person who spends their life on benefits unable to work. If Genesis is right, you are more than your output. You are more than your GDP contribution. Your value is more than what your body parts would sell for at auction. Your value is rooted in the fact that God has made you, in the fact that you are a human. It is the only basis for equality that works. The idea that we can assert that human rights, that equality are just self-evident is clearly false, because we've seen that it is not something that has been self-evident for most of human history. Some of the greatest thinkers didn't think that. It is not self-evident that human rights, that equality exists. You can't prove it under scientific conditions. And so you need to make a choice. Do you ditch it altogether? Do you say equality is just nonsense? Or do you say, I want to believe in equality because it makes society work well, even though I know that I can't prove that equality is a thing? Or do we listen to these words in Genesis? Those famous words, God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Don't you long to live in a world where every single person's value is inherent? Don't you long to live in a culture that looks at people and regardless of how they look or what they can do, they are all treated equally? My guess is that every single one of you longs for that. And the reason you long for that is because it's true. Because it is ultimately true that we are all equally valuable. As we come into a close of this part of our evening, let me outline the three basic options we have again. Option one is the approach that Yuval Harari takes in this kind of really best-selling book. He basically says the option that most humans need to take is to believe a convenient falsehood, to say we know that human rights don't really exist. But if we don't tell ourselves that story, society will fall apart. So let's kind of put aside the fact we know it's not true and just believe it anyway, because it's basically useful to do it. That is option one. Option two is to deny equal human rights, to say, look, I can go and do some testing and I can prove that some people are of more value than others. And therefore, because I can prove that scientifically speaking, some are stronger and some are weaker, the strong should have more. And so, no, people aren't equal and shouldn't be treated equally. That is the option that much of human history people have taken. You're going to believe a convenient falsehood. Will you deny equal human rights? Or third, will you have a firm foundation? Because Jesus gives us a firm foundation. God, in his words in the book of Genesis, gives us a firm foundation. My guess is that each of you believes passionately in equality. You believe that equality really matters. You want to be treated equally. You want to treat others equally. You want to see every single person treated with dignity, regardless of what they can perform or achieve or output. This evening, I have the privilege of offering you a firm foundation for that. The only firm foundation you'll find is in those words in Genesis. That says all people are made equal because all of them have been given God's image. What we're going to do now is kind of have a little break. Do feel free to grab a top-up of a drink. You've got on your tables, you've got question slip or kind of pieces of paper. If you want to ask any questions to do with equality at all, pop them down, and then we'll have some Q&A in a while where we'll have a chance to think about those together. So do grab another drink, and then in about 5 minutes, we'll do some Q&A.